as McKinsey, we are very, very passionate about mobility. Yes? It's bringing a lot of good to society, it's bringing a lot of good to industry, to many, many dimensions. And we are obviously, being McKinsey, we have all of our analysis up and running and indicators open, and all of our indicators point out that we are foreseeing a tremendous disruption and tremendous change of mobility. Now, it might not be unprecedented level of change, but you do have to go back quite a long time to see the same level of gravity and magnitude of change. And it's actually, when we look back, that's the first tipping point. We tried to point out the one single engine-powered car among all the horse carriages. But for us, what we are facing within the next decades is something like the shift from horse carriages to engine-powered vehicles. And then we had, for the next 120 years, we had obviously tremendous technological changes, tremendous economic changes, but we do see the second tipping point arising now with a decade of fundamental change to mobility. And why is that, and why do we believe that this is such a severe disruption that happens to all of the participants in that industry? First of all, there is a couple of drivers and, so to speak, also challenges for the industry and that. And first and foremost, and goes back to what my presenters have said before, it is customer-led and it's customer-centric. We need to put the customer and the consumer into the center of what we are looking at. And a couple observations and factoids to just show people really think differently now about mobility, being about the sustainability. It was interesting when you pointed out, they did the survey that 9% have already own or use an electric vehicle. When we do our customer research, more than 40% are actually considering an electric vehicle now in their choice in the funnel, which has incredibly increased in the last 2 to 3 years. So there is much more willingness to enter into a new technological platform, and that's, by the way, for plug-in hybrids, battery electric as well as fuel cells, so we're always combining them. Also very interesting that 30% of all trips in cities, when we simulate through, in some of the high-income, high-density cities, might actually, all passenger miles traveled might be on shared. So that there's a much higher utilization and obviously a much better utilization from the assets that comes out of that. And obviously, and we all have to just look around, connectivity. A car or any mobility device is another mobile device, so connectivity is extremely high. We see that 40% of the consumers are willing to change brands for better connectivity solutions. That value in China is, by the way, more than 80%, but loyalty is much, much lower. But even in the core markets in Europe, where traditionally car brand loyalty is very, very high, people are saying we want connectivity solutions. When I'm in the car, I want to use it to the best knowledge. The next second big driver is obviously technology, and in many aspects, those technologies are enabling some of the aspects. We typically call them ACEs, the 4 big technological trends: autonomous, connected, electrified, and shared. Also here, a couple observations. L4 technologies to be market ready, at least in certain geo-fenced areas by the early 2020s. Now we can discuss, there's lots of announcements out there that by 21 the first things will be, but it will be in a very foreseeable future, we will be able to have autonomous vehicles, and our children and grandchildren will look at us and say, what, do you steer the car with a steering wheel? You had to do it yourself, and there was an exhaust pipe at your car, so it will be a little bit like the picture what we had with the horse carriages, so it will change dramatically. What you also see, artificial intelligence has huge opportunities still. I mean, the mobility industry, as I experienced today, still has a product, since we can't beam ourselves, so you need to transport physical, so you need a product there and need technology there, and the technology needs to work. But artificial intelligence, we still have huge opportunities to better test out, to better find out, to better see also how do products older and how do they behave in life cycle, and thereby learn a lot. So there's still huge untapped potential also for the industry with new technologies in that side. And I think the battery cost curves, everyone knows how quickly we are able to run them down and how quickly it brings parity levels between combustion engines and electrified vehicles in all the different technologies to a new level. Being in Brussels, obviously regulator and regulatory forces are an important factor. I mean, when we only look at like, probably the most known fact of regulation, the CO2 tax that is implied and the penalty payments that is implied as of 2021, it actually will mean for the European countries that we will have to have more than 2 million electrified vehicles sold, which is a tremendous thing. I think currently the number is about 10% of that. So it will be a huge uplift and a huge ramp up of electrified vehicles up on the road that we need to deal with. And obviously, we also need to have the infrastructure there. If we look now at the industry, we do see the model programs, the platforms all in place. Lots of hundreds of billions have been invested around the globe into the new platforms. But now we will also need the infrastructure to overcome range anxiety, to overcome charging difficulties and problems. And finally, we also see whenever there's disruption in industry, there's also new players entering. And if you look at China, for example, then it's very fair to say that a lot of the pace and the momentum for electrification comes from China. They have a lot of control on the supply chain of the batteries. There's lots and lots of Chinese players. Most probably there will be a huge consolidation, which most probably is also meant to be from industrial policy. Typically, China wants to have a few world-leading companies in all of the industries. At least that's what they did in their 5-year plans in most of the other technologies industries. If you look at the ACES investments, then interestingly enough, 90% comes from out of auto. I mean, we have shown on the ACEA video how huge the R&D investments are, especially in the European automotive industry. Yet in the ACES trends, there's also lots of others investing into that. And then maybe just also one observation, Waymo is part of Alphabet, with like more than 1 million of testing kilometers on autonomous vehicles. It also shows how seriously they take it and how intensive the work is happening there. But we also see that the industry has taken up the challenge and is reacting. Just also one observation, we have now looked at all the alliances, the strategic partnerships that have been made since 2014, and we tried to group them a little bit into the area where is it more to share pain, for example, to share a combustion platform because no one really knows how long the life cycle time will really be and therefore risk averse or to manage and mitigate the risk a little bit better, but also on the electrification side. And where do we really see alliances and corporations on the other ACES trends, and you see already more than 84 corporations and partnerships are happening there, which is for the automotive industry or for the mobility industry quite a break from traditional behaviors, because in the past we were very much working in the OEM tier 1, tier 2 supply chains very, very effectively and efficiently, but this is now a lot more about horizontal corporations and also about building ecosystems. And I think when we look at it, then there's obviously mobility with a lot of turmoil, with a lot of uncertainty, with a lot of public discussions also on how bad things are going. Now, there is also a bright side to that. When we look at it, and we have now modeled out more than 2,000 cities. I'm not so sure whether Vilnius is part of that model, but we looked at more than 2,000 cities, and we looked at the trips today and the passenger miles traveled today. And then we said, what will we see in the future in 2030? The trips that are done by public transport today or by private-owned car, how will they change? What will be shared? What will be micromobility? Obviously, we base that the consumer is behaving rationally on TCO consideration, things like that. But it actually shows that the revenues for mobility are increasing dramatically, because at the end of the day, mobility is such an important aspect. It gets city going, it gets economy going. So connectivity is one of the deep-rooted drivers for development of mankind. And then we do see that obviously there is a moderate growth in the classical automotive component and system business. We do see an increase of the globally sold car from about 95 million today to about 99 million, which mostly comes from geographic growth. Second-tier cities in China, where household penetration cars is way less than it is today. We do see in many, many cities and in countries in Europe and in the US that actually car ownership goes down. So that's very clear. It comes from other parts. But then we do see connectivity services, which are always based on a product. So if you sit in your car and there is an opportunity to have over-the-air software updates, new functionalities. You have more battery range of things. Those would be connectivity services. Or if someone then decides we will do insurance premiums based on actual driver performance. So those would be the connectivity services. And then we have true mobility solutions, which are actually independent from a different product. So it would be the robocar fleets in a city once we have autonomous driving systems so reliable that they can operate. But it will also be the e-hailing offers, or it will be the micro-mobility offers that are already happening and are exploding in many, many cities around the globe. So 50% of additional revenues might come. So there is a bright look at it when you put an economic lens on it. And there's a lot of things to do for the industry in the different areas. I mean, alone in the product side, if we look at the R&D departments, what they have to do by mastering now all the complexity in the products with the electrification, with the platforms, with lightweight, the semi-automated driving. By connectivity services, we all want to communicate with the cars. We want voice recognition and voice control in the car. And we also want to have the car being live over the life cycle, so constant updates. That's a lot of work. And then obviously also on the mobility solutions. So on all of those fields, there's a huge amount of work and a huge level of competence needed. And therefore, we clearly see that most probably will not be the typical tier one chains that will control that, but we do see different ecosystem forming and developing. And it's now obviously a lot of glass ball looking, but it is very, very likely that there will be a Chinese ecosystem given their view on, for example, high definition car data. They will not give that to some foreigner. So there will most probably be a Chinese way out of it. There is a question on the automotive side. In the past, it's very often the premium industry that tried to lift innovations and then leverage them up across the industries. And most probably we'll also see ecosystems that are dominated or led by non-automotive, non-mobility players, more like tech giants or the platform players. Imagine if an Amazon is opening up mobility services and say, well, I have already such a customer base, a little bit of mobility, that's what I can do on top. Or if you think about Alphabet or the Chinese giants in there as well. And if we now summarized in close discussion with the ACEA and the member countries, what for Europe could be a way out? We see Europe is so strong in many of the competences technologies that we need this European mobility value. The network of leading institutes, there's a lot of opportunity for us there, and obviously we need to be able to manage that transition. But the strength of Europe has always been the top talents like to work in mobility. And if we can keep that, I'm not worried that we wouldn't be a good way forward. I think synchronization, infrastructure, and products has been talked about, new forms of cooperation, future mobility regulatory forum. We also believe that it has to be more integrated between the different industries. It would help Europe move forward a bit faster. And then Europe is so heterogeneous. We actually need to develop solutions for bigger cities, for the rural areas, for the districts, and then have a clear view on that and export that. And it's always been our strength to test things out and then export. And we believe, and that's the final chart, there should be a European way to that. We are looking at now 3 different economic systems. Obviously, that's a little bit now simplified, but we see the US very much based on data-based, software-based, tech-based business model, huge investment possibilities. We see China very much state-backed, going all in electrified. And what is the European way to deal with that? Playing on our strengths, more heterogeneous, more of a network of things. And if we apply that, then I also think that the next chapter of mobility can be successfully written in Europe, and there's a lot of opportunities for the European industry. Thank you so much.
So just a quick question. You were talking there about where there was increased revenue to be had. You said where the opportunities are, where the opportunities for industry are. And then we were just looking at those clusters at the end, and you were sort of employment. In the myriad research and reports you produce, are you looking, I presume you're looking into what is that job transition? Where are the gaps? I mean, Where do we
Yeah.
need to be a bit worried
Yeah.
in this? And where do we have a surfeit? Probably nowhere.
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is software. I mean, European industries are very, very strong on mechatronics, mechanical, also electronic components. We are not so strong on software. There is not really a software culture. There's not really the dual education system that even the US, even the Trump regime says, well, there's something we can learn from other countries. They say, this is very strong. We don't have that for software yet. So I think that transition from hardware, from mechanical, from mechatronics engineering over to software engineering, software testing, software architecture, I think that's a huge part. And the second part, and that's more for management leadership, how do we make money more with solutions and services rather than with products? I mean, we have so many talented engineers that know exactly if I have 2 more years' time, I will make a great product and the product will sell itself. If I have a customer relationship of a mobility device and I can monetize some of the value, that's not yet so much into our DNA.
Yeah.
So I would call out those two as the most important ones.
Thank you, thank you. And also that was very interesting to me when you, if I got it correctly, when you were talking about people who normally might be very pro a particular brand, they're very brand centric,
Yeah.
you know, but actually they're going to switch for, we called it in the last, the Connected and Automated Driving, pervasive connectivity, for the better connectivity. So you're seeing that shift, you're seeing
We
that
see
change.
that shift. We have been running now customer surveys in the 3 big markets, US, China, and Europe, for the last 5 years. And we do see that very, very clearly. It's been slow at the beginning, and with more functionality, with more also cloud about if Tesla is announcing that they are actually upgrading their battery range over life cycle, then people are saying, well, this is something, or if there's autonomous driving functionalities because the sensors and the mechanics is on board, and that's so people are getting more aware of that. And obviously one of the biggest shortcomings in mobility is being in traffic jams.
Sure.
So connectivity solutions there is also an important aspect. So there is a clear customer benefit there.